The following is an interview with the Lord of the Sixth House, Dagoth Ur. This was shot during the third era of year 427, around 7 p.m. within the confines of Red Mountain. The interview, if you watch it, is primarily about the war on the Tribunal, how it started, what's happening, and most presently, how it might end. One note before you watch. At the beginning of the interview, we asked the most obvious question. Why did you spread the blight across the lands of Vvardenfell? Why claim a land that's been plagued? Did you feel a threat? And is that your justification? And the answer we got shocked us. Dagoth went on for a very long time, probably half an hour, about history of the battle between the Dwemer and the Battle of Red Mountain, going back to the first era. And honestly, we thought this was a filibustering technique, and we found it very annoying and interrupted him several times. He also responded that he was annoyed by our interruption. But we concluded in the end that this was not a filibustering technique. There was no time limit on the interview. We ended it after an hour. Instead, what you're about to see seemed to us sincere. Whether you agree with it or not, Dagoth believes to expose the false worship of the Tribunal and destroy the ecclesiastical authority and political power of the temple. So our opinion would be to view it in a light as a sincere expression of what he thinks. And with that, here it is. Mr. Dagoth, thank you. During the Second Era, year 8082, reports of an altercation happened between you and the Tribunal. After this altercation, you began to spread the blight and corporous diseases by using powerful and unnatural ash storms from Red Mountain. Tell me, why spread something so dangerous to a land that you wish to conquer?
It's not like people are dying on the streets of Balmora, are they? Mr. Tucker, are we having a talk show or a serious conversation?
Here's the quote. Thank you. It's
because your basic education is in history, as far as I understand?
Yes.
So if you don't mind, I will take about 30 seconds or maybe a minute into a short reference to history for giving you a little historical background.
Please.
To explain how the Blight started, I need to explain who the Dwemer were. The Dwemer, also referred to as the Dwarves, deep elves, were an ancient lost race of Mer who were remnants of the early Aldmer and lived primarily in the region of Dwemereth. Mer used the term Dwemer, roughly translated as people of the deep. The term also connoted deep delving, profound, and close-counseled. Men commonly refer to them as dwarves, in reference to the fables of the giants, seeing them as small. The Dwemer were an advanced race and civilization, in many respects far ahead of the other races and civilizations of their time. They are well known for their skill and revolutionary developments in technology, engineering, crafting methods, metalwork, stonework, architecture, city planning, science, mathematics, magic, and the academic arts. The Dwemer are known for being the subjects of one of the greatest mysteries in all of Tamriel. In 1E 700, during the Battle of Red Mountain, for reasons still debated and under circumstances still under investigation, the Dwemer seemingly disappeared. It is still being debated who or what caused the Dwemer to disappear, as well as whether they disappeared all at once or over a long period of time. Recorded history dates the beginning of the Dwemer to the Morethic era, though it could be said that the earliest known history of the Dwemer was when the Aedra created Mundus, the mortal realm, and with it, all of the mortal races. Essays, stories, legends, and tales have generally described the appearance and personality of the Dwemer race in general, but not of individuals. In appearance, the Dwemer were believed to be sized similarly to the average elf or human, though occasionally likened to large children with beards. Other supporting evidence includes visual sculptures and dwarven specters that roam the halls within their ruined dwellings, which indicate that the Dwemer preferred heavy metal armors and robes, most of which are made out of either armored shells of ancient mechanical men or mismatched pieces from various devices. As the Dwemer were a race of Mer, their blood was closely related to that of the other Mer races. In the Fourth Era, when the last Dragonborn helped Septimus Cygnus in a quest to open a Dwemer lockbox using Dwemer blood, Septimus Cygnus revealed that the blood of 5 Mer races could be collected and mixed by using an essence extractor to produce a close enough approximation to open the lockbox. Similarly to the members of the Psijic order, the Dwemer race also possessed the ability known as the calling, to telepathically communicate with each other. Little is known of the history of the Dwemer and the origins of their civilization. Conflicts with other races were frequent, as was infighting. As such, the timeline is not entirely accurate for many of these events. Recorded history dates the beginning of the Dwemer to the Merethic era, though it could be said that the earliest known history of the Dwemer was when the Aedra created Mundus, the mortal realm, and with it, all of the mortal races. During the Dawn era, Lorcan convinced some of the Et Ada to create a mortal realm, which would be called Mundus. As Mundus was forming, it was revealed that many of the Et Ada would be forced to give up much of their power. Due to this, the Et Ada met at the Adamantine Tower during an event known as the Convention, and ultimately decided that Lorcan had to be punished for his trickery, which was eventually carried out. With the creation of Mundus, some of the Et Ada went to Nirn to live there. Magnus tore a hole into Aetherius, which became Nirn's sun. Many other Et Ada followed and became the Magna Gi, tearing smaller holes into Aetherius, which became the stars. The Aedra who walked on Mundus, specifically Nirn, created the Aelnofey. The Aelnofey of Tamriel became the Mer, and many different races of Mer came about. The Dwemer were one of the descendants of the Aelnofey. At some time after their creation, the tonal architects started to research the divine powers of the Aelnofey, or the Earthbones. The Dwemer were devising a plan to attempt to recreate the divine power of immortality. Most of the Dwemer wished to ascend to the same level of divine power that the gods had, including the capability of being immortal. By the late Middle Merethic era, the Dwemer had established themselves on Morrowind and within the Velothi Mountains, a mountain range located between Morrowind and Skyrim. The Chimer had established themselves on Morrowind, then known as Resdain. The two civilizations had very different societies and cultures. These differences, as well as disputes over territory and resources, caused conflicts between the two civilizations. The earliest Dwemer freehold colonies date from the late Merethic era. Sometime after 1E 221, the Dwemer discovered a new raw mineral while mining in Fal Jardum Din, more commonly known as Blackreach. They named this new mineral Etherium. An alliance was formed between Blackreach, Arkanthums, Raldbathar, Munzulft, and Batarzel, now known as Deep Folk Crossing. The responsibilities of this project were spread between the cities. Arkanthums served as the main command center and the primary research facility, while Raldbathar, which was the primary source of Etherium, was given the role of dealing with mining operations. Mazulft was used as a storage site, and it is unknown what role Batarzel was assigned. The Etherium Forge was constructed deep beneath the city of Bethalft, where the ethereal artifacts would be constructed under precisely controlled conditions. In a short amount of time, each of the 4 city-states that were a part of the project eventually attempted to take control of the forge themselves, which evidently led to a civil war erupting at the core of the Dwemer civilization, known as the Etherium Wars. Decades passed as the war raged throughout Skyrim, and over time the war had begun to weaken the Dwemer city-states in Skyrim, and was enough to cripple their empire. Eventually, High King Geller of Skyrim decided that it was time to crush the weakened Dwemer city-states, and led his armies across Skyrim in a campaign of rapid dominance. He and his armies spread across Skyrim, conquering the land and taking over many Dwemer cities in only 3 years. A century later, around 1E 324, the Dwemer regained their foothold in Skyrim and would eventually reclaim and reunite most of the cities and territory they had previously lost during the war. With no evidence to support otherwise, it is assumed that the project itself was abandoned, the risks being far too great. During the War of the Crag in the early First Era, the Snow Elves, cousins to the Dwemer, were being beaten by the Atmarans, who had by that time launched a war against them after the Night of Tears. The Battle of the Mosring was the turning point for the Nords during that war, who began to achieve more victories against them. The remaining snow elves were forced into hiding, many seeking help and refuge among the Dwemer. The Dwemer would agree to their request, but only if the snow elves complied in consuming a toxic fungus. Eventually, the Dwemer betrayed and enslaved the snow elves, indirectly causing the devolution of the Falmer over many decades. However, at some point, the Falmer rose up against the Dwemer in revolt, resulting in the War of the Crag, which ended when the entire Dwemer race mysteriously vanished. There was constant feuding and conflict between the Chimer and Dwemer, mostly over issues of religion, magic, and enchantment practices, and other cultural differences. This continued until the creation of the First Council in 1E 416. The First Council was the first Pan-Dwemer governing body, and was created when the Dwemer and Chimer united to expel the Nords from Morrowind. However, the Rorken clan refused to make peace with the Chimer. Their patriarch instead threw his ceremonial warhammer Volendrung across Tamriel, proclaiming that his clan would settle where it landed. They eventually settled in modern-day Hammerfell, later the home of the Redguards. On the journey to modern-day Hammerfell, they encountered a powerful mage known as Shalador, who fought against them. This would come to be known as the Battle of Rorken-Shalador. King Rorken was said to have used his shield, Spellbreaker, during the battle. The First Council was hugely successful, and both civilizations benefited from the alliance. The combined military strength of the Chimer and the Dwemer successfully removed the Nords from Morrowind. The Chimer and Dwemer armies annihilated the Nordic forces, leaving them humbled as they left Morrowind. According to legend, after Lorcan tricked or convinced the Aedra to create the mortal realm, they tore out his divine heart and threw it down to Nirn, to be hidden forever. Tensions had begun to flare between the Chimer and Dwemer once again, when Kegranak, the chief tonal architect of the Dwemer, prompted the discovery of a mythological artifact known as the Heart of Lorcan, deep within the mountain. When the Chimer heard of this, they believed the Dwemer were mocking their cultural beliefs. As a result, the Second Battle of Red Mountain erupted in 1E 700. Kegranak devised a set of tools, Sunder, Keening, and Wraithguard, to manipulate the heart to instill divinity in his people in order to make them immortal. However, the spell seems to have backfired, causing all known Dwemer to vanish in a manner similar to a dragon break. Since 1E 700, no word has been heard of the Dwemer, with the notable exception of Yagrum Bagarn, who resided in the Corpusarium of Telfir. Apparently, he was absent from the mortal plane at the time of the disappearance, visiting an alternate dimension. His 3,000 years of exploration and 500 years of investigation have yielded no indication of the presence of his people on Mundus or any other plane of existence currently known. During Tiber Septim's conquest in 2E 864, the Emperor took an interest in Dwemer artifacts. In an attempt to understand the inner workings of the remains of the race's work, Septim ordered Emil Richten to commence research on the Dwemer machinery at Stros Mackay. Richten appointed Erasmo, an elderly Bosmer, to research the observatory and animatronics within. When Richten attempted to escape the island from the Restless League uprising, he used a working Dwemer airship to fly off. However, Cyrus managed to climb onto the airship and destroyed it, cutting the fragile cloth keeping it afloat. During this time, some people were convinced that the secrets of the Dwemer would soon be mastered, and that their technology would be integrated into modern-day use. Predictions included inventions of personal flying machines and new steam-powered appliances.
So you're saying the dwarfs disappeared because of a Kagranak's tools? I mean, with all due respect, Mr. Dagoth, what does this have to do with the blight that you're spreading to the population of Vivardenfell?
I will get to that part in a moment. I understand that my history lesson may be a bit boring, but I will get to the crucial point. Now, as I mentioned about the Dwemer, they were a free-thinking and reclusive elven race who lived in Tamriel, mostly in Morrowind, during the Merethic era and the First Era. They were, in general, a very advanced and powerful civilization. Dwemer society did not encourage the use of technology over magic, but the general view of their society was that magic was unimportant and pointless. So much so that most other races thought them mockers and profaners of the divine. The Dwemer have been called an evil race, as according to many scholars, the Dwemer were feared by the Dunmer, Nords, and Redguards they encountered, or thought cruel. On the other hand, the Dwemer people have also been called a noble and honorable race, with legends that tell of their heroic deeds of honor and glory. Few written works have described the appearance, personality, or achievements of individual Dwemer. Most knowledge of the Dwemer regards the race as a whole. In addition, it is unclear whether the Dwemer were a single united empire or a group of related clans. The Dwemer seem to have revered the pursuits of logic and science, in contrast to other Mer races. An individual whose career was in philosophy, mathematics, science, metallurgy, or architecture would likely have been elevated to the highest, most respected, and most prestigious of positions in Dwemer society. Those who studied and reasoned would have reached a position that would have equaled clergy in a more mystically inclined culture. This idea is supported by a fragment of Dwemerist text recovered from Erkingthand and translated by Dwemer scholar Fenway Galeen, who believes it to be associated with the Rorken clan. While some scholars interpret those words as evidence to support that the Dwemer may have worshipped Mundus, Thelway Galeen hypothesizes that the Dwemerist quotes are related to society and civil matters. There are several known ranks in Dwemer society, including High Priest, General, Lord, Counselor, and Protector. A major rank in Dwemer society was that of Tonal Architect, or Mage Crafter. Usually crafters and mage engineers, tonal architects specialized in magic technologies and devices, and were led in their studies by a chief tonal architect. Both the Dwemer's language and writing system is referred to as Dwemerus. The language utilized many Z's and D's in its form. The writing system was composed of and written as the Dwemer's own form of runes and glyphs, aesthetically similar to that of the Daedric alphabet, yet it was heavily based on the Aldmeri language. Some forms of Dwemerus have been seen in the form of prefixes and suffixes of notable Dwemer names of various historical terms, such as Volan, meaning hammer, and Fell, meaning city, giving Volanfell, City of the Hammer. The Warhammer Volendrung has had its name translated into Hammer of Might by Dwemer scholars and translators. The nation of Hammerfell attributed its name to the Warhammer Volendrung, as Dwemer and Hammerfell lore history held that the chieftain of the Rorken clan decided to move his people to a new location, so he threw that very Warhammer from Morrowind and would move to wherever it ended up. This was at the site of the city of Volenfell and Hammerfell, hence the two locations' names. The name Falzardum Din, based on observations of Dwemerist texts and inscriptions on tablets and walls in an unknown Dwemer city, has been revealed to be the Dwemer name for Blackreach. There is no known story behind the Dwemer's disassociation with the Aldmer and other Mer races, as their society contained very few similarities with the other Mer races, other than some political and legal principles, and aspects of their language and writing system. The Dwemer were also far different from any other race on Tamriel. Some scholars have stated that the Dwemer preferred the use of machines and tools to the use of magic, while there is some evidence to suggest that the Dwemer also used magic. Some non-scholarly sources suggest that the dwarves didn't believe in magic at all. The precise nature of Dwemer religion and worship is unknown, but one could name their religion Negalithic Refusatronic World Naval Gazanism, UL3. However, it is recorded that they scorned the Daedra, the 9 divines, and essentially all of the gods, and attempted to defy them with their values of reason and logic. The Dwemer people apparently believed that their power rivaled the gods, a claim which many scholars agree may have led to their demise, some even going so far as to call them blasphemous. The Dwemer challenged the power and superiority of the Et-Ada, the Aedra, and Daedra, questioned their authority, and traveled from Mundus into the outer realms of Etherius and Oblivion. In their underground sanctuaries, the Dwemer studied powerful magical relics and researched powers that they believed could rival the gods themselves. The Dwemer religion, if there was one at all, has been said to be one of the most complex and difficult puzzles of Dwemer culture. Dwarves were known to have created and manufactured on a vast scale thousands of mechanical apparatuses of varying complexity, most of which were constructed within the city of Ninchardak, a large military production center. These constructs are referred to as animunculi, or simply automatons, who were known to cause havoc when unleashed against enemies on the battlefield, completely obliterating enemy forces. Several types were found within ancient Dwemer ruins, the most simple being that of an arachnid designed to ward off trespassers. Most automatons contained a soul gem, sometimes more than one. According to research done by famed scholar Calcelmo and Sulla Trebatius, which were still theories, the soul gems were believed to be what powered these machines. It may have also acted as a source of power for the boiler due to the extreme energy held within it. In some automatons, such as the dwarven spider guardian, the soul gems may have acted as a source of destruction magic, being able to attack intruders with lightning bolts. They appeared to allow the spiders to function besides their internal steam power systems, electrical systems, and working gears and cogs. The other types of animunculi that were encountered included ballistas, centurions, and spheres. They were capable of receiving, interpreting, and responding to the actions of people around them, due to the excellent work produced by Dwemer engineers. Animunculi were somehow linked to their place of origin, and would immediately lose power and shut down if removed from the vicinity. It was possible that animunculi were capable of reconstructing and repowering themselves to go back to protecting their former masters' denizens. Dwarven military equipment was effective and resilient to the effects of time. Their weapons were powerful and their armors strong. Dwarven swords were effective at breaking through light armors. This was due to the venerability and sharpness of tempered dwarven metal, and owed less to the double-edged design. Dwarven armors were capable of withstanding incredibly heavy blows and taking on the most powerful of arrows. This was due to the fact that the dwarves were an empire, civilization, and culture built almost exclusively underground, so the Dwemer race itself was naturally accustomed to the aspects of living underground. Just like dwarven swords and other weapons, the effectiveness of dwarven armor was more of a testament to great metallurgy skills rather than armor-smithing skills. When a dwarven dagger was compared to an elven dagger, it was clear that most Dwemer weaponsmiths relied almost exclusively on creating quality crafting materials first, and allowed the final forms of those materials to stem from the concept that the weapon was intended to kill people. Dwemer armies also experimented with the use of crossbows. Though bows were additionally used, crossbows were technologically advanced. Various Dwemer engineers drew up several schematics for crossbows, including a standard and enhanced version. Schematics were also drawn up for explosive bolts to be used alongside the standard bolt, of which 3 known variants have been identified: an exploding firebolt, exploding ice bolt, and an exploding shock. During their existence, the Dwemer constructed many devices and machines. One of the creations they built was a monstrous golem called Numidium, also known as the Brass God. Numidium was designed to help them gain the divine power of immortality and transcend Nirn, also known as the Mortal Realm. 3 powerful tools were designed to help the tonal architects tap into and draw power directly from the heart. These 3 tools included Keening, Sunder, and Wraithguard. Wraithguard was designed to protect the wearer from the potentially dangerous effects when experimenting with the heart of Lorcan. Sunder was designed to extract the specific amount and quality of divine power when working on the heart. Keening was designed to focus and attune the divine power being extracted from the heart. Other machines created were the Dwemer convectors, highly advanced machines that were developed and used to alter any soul gem and transform it into a warped soul gem. One such device they created was a control cube, which was designed and used to control specific constructs and maintain them. The Dwemer of Nchardak notably used many of these cubes to maintain their city, by controlling the various power systems that kept the city stable, and to control the power system which supplied power to the reading room, as they would no doubt want to keep their massive, expansive library safe from outsiders. Another piece of technology the Dwemer constructed were tonal resonators. They were used as openers of doors and checkpoint markers between passageways and still function in modern days. Two devices the Dwemer created were attunement spheres and dwarven mechanisms, which were devices designed and used to open the entrance to Blackreach. The two devices directly interacted with one another. By placing an attunement sphere into a dwarven mechanism, the entrance to Blackreach would be unlocked. However, the pinnacle of their genius was the creation of a device called a lexicon, which allowed them to read an Elder Scroll without going mad or blind, as well as acting as a portable information repository, being able to store vast amounts of knowledge within the device. As such, combinations of machinery and magic were trademarks of the Dwemer. During the Dawn Era, the Dwemer attempted to reach the state of immortality up to the point of their disappearance. They researched the fall of the Earth Bones and were essentially trying to reverse the effects for themselves to create immortality from the deaths of the Earth Bones. The Dwemer were trying to defy the gods while also attempting to recreate their powers. The book Divine Metaphysics explained how the Dwemer tried to forge a new god, Anumidium, using Kagranak's tools and the sacred tones on the heart of Lorcan. It was unfashionable among the Dwemer to view their spirits as synthetic constructs, 3, 4, or 40 creational gradients below the divine. The Dwemer were, however, not unified in their thinking. Some opposed the research on the Elnafey Earth Bones and the idea that the Dwemer race should be immortal. The ones who opposed this believed that using the power Lorcan's heart was an unjustifiable risk. Later, during the Battle of Red Mountain, Chief Tonal Architect Kagranak made one last shot at succeeding in bringing immortality to his people, and in doing so, caused their entire people to disappear. It is unknown whether he succeeded or failed. Though the ancient tales of the Dwemer book series is fictional and regarded by many scholars as mislabeling the Dwemer, the story Azura and the Box tells of a Dwemer scholar who did not believe in the gods and religion. In Azura and the Box, Nchilbar met with his old friend Athinik. During their visit together, Nchilbar told Athinik that he intended to discover the nature of divine power. Athinik protested, but from the ties of a great friendship, he reluctantly agreed to help his friend. Athinik summoned Azura, and when Azura appeared, she spoke to him. Azura, Athinik, and Nchilbar discussed what might have been in the closed box that Athinik's students brought in. Azura said that there was a red-petaled flower in the box, but when Nchilbar opened the box, he revealed to everybody in the room that the box was empty. When Azura was about to leave, she made a look that only Athinik saw, and then she left. For Athinik, he could not speak and was trembling. That night, Nchilbar, who did not believe that the existence and power of the gods was legitimate, was found dead.
Right, but you mentioned Kagranak is the reason to why the dwarfs disappeared. Why did he use the tools? What would cause him to use it?
You see, Mr. Tucker, if you let me get to the reason why, I will explain. As I mentioned earlier, this was due to the Battle of Red Mountain. Prior to the war, the Chimer and Dwemer had united under Nerevar to drive out the Nords from Resdain during the Nordic War of Succession. This marked the founding of the Great Houses, which one source divides into Orthodox and Secular, with houses Dress, Hlalu, Indoril, Redoran, and House Telvanni comprise the former, and House Dagoth and House Dwemer comprise the latter. Several accounts attribute the war to simple cultural differences between the Dwemer and the Chimere that were too great to allow for peace. The event that began the march to war was the discovery by House Dagoth that the Dwemer had discovered the heart of Lorkhan beneath Red Mountain. This led to heated negotiations between Nerevar and Dumak Dwarf King. Upon being told by Azura that the Dwemer were building a new god under the mountain, Nerevar and the Tribunal issued an ultimatum to the Dwemer to stop work on their new god or face destruction. Dumak, ignorant of the work Kagrenak had done on the heart, refused. And so the Chimere and Dwemer went to war. During the battle, there was a major standoff at the chamber where the heart of Lorkhan was kept. One tale claims Nerevar, the Tribunal, and me snuck into the chamber where the heart of Lorkhan was kept and confront Dumak and Kagrenak. Some people also claimed that Wulfharth rode the Khajiit hero Drozira up the Red Mountain itself to strike at the heart of the Chimere. In the chamber, Wulfharth had obtained the heart but needed time to acclimate to its power. During this time, he and I faced Nerevar and his two companions, Alandro Sul and Dumak Dwarf King, and was said to have fell in this fight. In the ensuing battle, Dumak is killed, although precisely who killed Dumak is uncertain. Some sources claim Nerevar, others Wulfharth, and yet others a Khajiit called Drozira. Sources are similarly unclear as to whether Nerevar was killed during the battle, died from his wounds after the battle, or was murdered by the Tribunal. And Wulfharth, if he had been at the battle at all, either died at the Heart's Chamber after being weakened by Dumak and slain by Indoril Nerevar, or blasted away into ashes by Vivek, if Vorin Dagoth led his army into a trap. However, that the Dwemer disappeared during the battle. This is either because Kagrenak turned his tools on the heart, or because Azura told Nerevar and the Tribunal how to use the tools to banish the Dwemer. House Dagoth was also destroyed either in this battle or in its immediate aftermath. After the battle, the Red Mountain erupts, and the eruption became known as Year of Winter in Summer by the Nords, or Sun's Death by the Khajiit and Imperials. Some also say it was caused by the defeat of the god Maulok. The precise date for this event is disputed. Following the destruction of House Dagoth and the Dwemer, the First Council is reformed into the Grand Council, which comprises only the victorious great houses. The Tribunal recovered Kagrenak's tools, and, at some point, used them to become gods. The Chimere were changed into the Dunmer after the battle, although sources differ on when this occurred. Some say it was a curse from Azura, made immediately after the battle to punish the Tribunal for their murder of Nerevar. Others claim it was done to punish their use of the tools years later.
So you're saying, is that the tools were used by the Tribunal to become gods? From what I understand, the book called War of the First Council suggests a battle between the houses took place and you were defeated.
You see, Mr. Tucker, the War of the First Council was written by an imperial scholar called Agrippa Fundilius. This is based on various imperial and Dunmer sources, and written for godless beings like you. The book on the War of the First Council suggests that a religious conflict between the secular Dunmer houses Dwemer and Dagoth, and the orthodox Dunmer houses Indoril, Redoran, Dres, Halaalu, and Telvanni. The First Council was the first pan-Dunmer governing body, which collapsed over disputes about sorceries and enchantments practiced by the Dwemer, and declared profane by the other houses. The secular houses, less numerous, but politically and magically more advanced, and aided by Nord and Orc clans, drawn by promise of land and booty, initially campaigned with great success in the north of Morrowind, and occupied much of the land now comprising Redoran, Vardenfell, and Telvanni district. The Orthodox houses, widely dispersed and poorly organized, suffered defeat after defeat until Nerevar was made general of all house troops and levies. Nerevar secured the aid of nomad barbarian tribesmen and contrived to force a major battle at the secular stronghold of Red Mountain on Vardenfell. The secular forces were outmaneuvered and defeated with the help of Ashlander scouts, and the survivors forced to take refuge in the Dwemer stronghold at Red Mountain. After a brief siege, treason permitted Nerevar and his troops to enter the stronghold, where the secular leaders were slain and Nerevar mortally wounded. General slaughter followed, and houses Dwemer and Dagoth were exterminated. Nerevar died shortly thereafter of his wounds. 3 of Nerevar's associates among the Orthodox houses, Vivek, Almalexia, and Sothasil, succeeded to control of the recreated First Council, renamed the Grand Council of Morrowind, and went on to become the God-Kings and immortal rulers of Morrowind, known as the Tribunal, or Almsivi. As you can see, the book merely skims over the events that unfolded and gives a brief summit on what took place on Red Mountain. Again, Mr. Tucker, if you kindly let me finish, I will explain what really happened. During the assault on Red Mountain, the Dwemer were well defended by their fortress at Red Mountain, but Nerevar's cunning drew most of Dumach's armies out into the field and pinned them there, while Nerevar, me, and a small group of companions could make their way into the Heart Chamber by secret means. There, Nerevar met Dumach, the Dwarf King, and they both collapsed from grievous wounds and draining magics. With Dumach fallen and threatened by me and others, Kagranak turned his tools upon the heart, and Nerevar said he saw Kagranak and all his Dwemer companions at once disappear from the world. In that instant, Dwemer everywhere disappeared without a trace, but Kagranak's tools remained. I seized them and carried them to Nerevar, saying, "That fool Kagranak has destroyed his own people with these things. We should destroy them right away, lest they fall into the wrong hands." But Nerevar was resolved to confer with his queen and his generals, who had foreseen that this war would come, and whose counsel he would not ignore again. "I will ask the tribunal what we shall do with them, for they have had wisdom in the past that I had not. Stay here until I return." So Nerevar told me to protect the tools and the heart chamber until he returned. Then Nerevar returned to the tribunal, who waited on the slopes of Red Mountain, and he told them what transpired under Red Mountain. What Nerevar had said was that the Dwemer had used special tools to turn their people into immortals, and that the heart of Lorcan held wondrous powers. I believe that the Dwemer were destroyed, not made immortal. After hearing Nerevar, the tribunal gave their counsel as he requested, proposing, "We should preserve these tools in trust for the welfare of the Chimer people, and who knows, perhaps the Dwemer are not gone forever, but merely transported to some distant realm, from which they may someday return to threaten our security once again. Therefore, we need to keep these tools, to study them and their principles, so that we may be safe in future generations." And though Nerevar voiced his grave misgivings, he was willing to be ruled by our council under one condition, that we all together should swear a solemn oath upon Azura, that the tools would never be used in the profane manner that the Dwemer had intended. We all readily agreed and swore solemn oaths at Nerevar's dictation. So, they all followed Nerevar back into Red Mountain and met with me. I refused to hand over the tools, as I did not trust the tribunal to handle such power. I had just witnessed an entire race disappear before my eyes, so I wanted to secure these tools for myself. Then Nerevar and our guard resorted to force to secure the tools. Somehow, I and my retainers escaped, but the tribunal managed to gain the tools and delivered them to Sothasil for study and safekeeping. For some years they all kept the oaths and swore to Azura with Nerevar, but during that time in secret, Sothasil must have studied the tools and divined their mysteries. Now you might be wondering how I've managed to obtain the information on what transpired between the tribunal and Azura. A sleeper agent informed me Malur Omain confronted Vivek with the Ashlander regarding the Battle of Red Mountain and with prophecies of the Nerevarine returning. Anywho, the tribunal all assumed that a vision of a new world of peace, with justice and honor for nobles, and health and prosperity for the commoners, with the tribunal as immortal patrons and guides, and dedicating ourselves to this vision of a better world, they all made a pilgrimage to Red Mountain and transformed ourselves with the power of Kagranek's tools. And no sooner than they all had completed the rituals and begun to discover our newfound powers, the Daedra Lord Azura appeared and cursed them for our forsworn oaths. By her powers of prophecy, she assured us that her champion, Nerevar, true to his oath, would return to punish us for our perfidy, and to make sure such profane knowledge might never again be used to mock and defy the will of the gods. But Sothasil said to her, "The old gods are cruel and arbitrary, and distant from the hopes and fears of Mer. Your age is past. We are the new gods, born of the flesh, and wise and caring of the needs of our people. Spare us your threats and chiding in constant spirit. We are bold and fresh, and will not fear you." In that moment, all Chimer were changed into Dwemer, and their skins turned ashen, and our eyes into fire. Of course, the tribunal only knew at that time that this had happened to them, but Azura said, "This is not my act, but your act. You have chosen your fate, and the fate of your people, and all the Dwemer shall share your fate, from now to the end of time. You think yourselves gods, but you are blind, and all is darkness." And Azura left them alone, in darkness. And now, the tribunal would have to put on a brave faces and become the gods of the new world of their dreams. And the new world we shaped was glorious and generous, and the worship of the Dwemer fervent and grateful. The Dwemer were at first afraid of their new faces, but Sothasil spoke to them, saying that it was not a curse but a blessing, a sign of their changed natures, and sign of the special favor they might enjoy as new Mer, no longer barbarians trembling before ghosts and spirits, but civilized Mer, speaking directly to their immortal friends and patrons, the three faces of the tribunal. And we were all inspired by Sothasil's speech and vision, and took heart. And over time, we crafted the customs and institutions of a just and honorable society. And the land of Resdain knew millennia of peace, equity, and prosperity, unknown to other savage races. But beneath Red Mountain, I had survived. And even as the light of Thyr's bold new world shined ever more brightly, beneath Red Mountain, the powers gathered, a darkness that was close kin to the bright light that Sothasil coaxed from the heart of Lorkhan with the tools of Kagrenak. As my power grew, the false gods fought it and crafted walls to confine my powers, but they could destroy it, for the source of the darkness was the same source as the source of their own divine inspiration. And in these latter days of Morrowind, reduced to a subjugated province of the Western Empire, as the glory of the temple fades and the dark tide rises from Red Mountain, we are reminded of Azura and her promised champion's return. We have waited, blind and in darkness, mere shadows, drained of our ardent vision, in shame of our folly, in fear of our judgment, and in hope of our deliverance. We do not know if the Outlander claiming to fulfill the prophecies of the Nerevarine is our old companion, Nerevar reborn, or a pawn of the Emperor, or a catspaw of Azura, or some simple twist of fate.
So, if what you're saying is true, then the reason why Almalexia, Sothasil, and Vivek won't do anything to stop you is because the powers they obtained from Kagrenak's tools and the heart of Lorkhan is the same powers that you're using. Now, I understand why you want to defeat the tribunal, but why, Mr. Dagoth, do the people need to suffer with the blight disease that you're spreading?
The Dwemer accepted their fate and began to worship the three as their new gods, adding them to their traditions of worshiping ancestors, forming the new tribunal temple. The three founded new cities after their own names to act as their capitals. Vivek's city was in Vardenfell, the largest island in Morrowind. As their power grew, the Tribunal learned how to undo the curse on themselves, enabling them to appear Chimer again, if they wished. Vivek himself chose to embrace both who he was and who he had become, deciding to appear half Chimer and half Dwemer. From their inception as deities, the Tribunal flourished and exhibited great power and heroism, but it was Vivek who flourished the most, distinguishing himself as an unstoppable force of nature and a shrewd commander in what became called the Fourscore War, which began in 1E2840 and didn't end until 1E2920. He was almost single-handedly responsible for deliberating the de facto victory for the Dwemer, with nothing but diplomatic prowess, while signing the Servant Truce in Caer Suvio in Cyrodiil. Early in the Second Era, he rose the sea to drive out the Second Akaviri invasion. It is worth mentioning the Tribunal also thwarted the First Akaviri invasion. He also had an unmatched understanding of history, and even predicted the rise of General Talos, which inevitably led to his ceasing of hostile relations with Cyrodiil and forming an alliance with the Empire. Shortly after the Second Akaviri invasion, in 2E582, Kunun Chodala, a false Nerevarine, attempted to steal Vivek's power through Sothasil's staff Sunara, which gravely weakened Vivek. The Vestige and Serin, a champion of Azura, rose to Vivek's aid and defeated Chodala, one rare example of Azura showing Vivek, the Tribunal at all, favor, though it was only to protect Vardenfell. However, before it could be recovered, both Sothasil's staff and the drained energy of Vivek were seized by Clavicus Vile's trusted minion, Barbas, who had disguised himself as Vivek's high priest, Archcanon Tarvus, and now planned to use Vivek's power to enter the Clockwork City. Unable to stop Vile due to his weakened state, Bardau fell ever closer to Vivek City, threatening the eruption of Red Mountain. Luckily, the Vestige and Serin had remained and helped a still weak Vivek to foil Vile's plots, eventually restoring Vivek to full strength. Sometime after the rise of the Tribunal, Sothasil constructed the Clockwork City to serve several purposes. He saw the creation of the Aedra, Nirn, as wholly flawed and desired to perfect it. It was meant to be the redemption of Tamriel, that it would unify competing forces and destroy the Daedra. His vision of a self-contained world made of brass and machinery was, to say the least, incredibly ambitious, and he used highly advanced methods to see it through. He created the Celestiodrome, a massive glass globe that surrounded the entire realm and could be perceived as a sky by its inhabitants, capable of mimicking day-night cycles, with rotating girders installed to allow for the proper topography to form. In order to sustain life, he created the Halls of Regulation to make a breathable atmosphere, drinkable water, and the ideal humidity, temperature, wind currents, and more to create, sustain, and preserve life. Much of Sothasil's inspiration stems from the Dwemer, and their influence to his work is rumored to be traceable even as far back as their disappearance. Most famous among these influences was Sothasil's research into tonal architecture. He refined it much further than even Kagranak had been capable of, creating items based on their research, such as forks that could be used as divining rods. He also dove into the world of constructs, tinkering in ways beyond the most talented individuals. He created humanoid automatons known as factotums that worked to maintain the Clockwork City. The early prototypes more closely resembled dwarven automatons, constructed from both Dwemer and clockwork parts. Ultimately, his style became his own, and the city's structures, vegetation, and wildlife are all mechanical constructs of his own design. He eventually created half-organic machines called fabricants, which would become the first step Sothasil took into combining engineering and nature. Sothasil experimented endlessly with soul gems, to the point he eventually became entirely dissatisfied with them, constantly seeking new power sources for his creations. One such invention was the Animus Geode, but their uses were limited. With factotums, he came up with the Animo Core, a brass vessel that still used a soul gem, but in a much different way. Eventually, his tinkering with soul gems led Sotha Sil to be the first to reverse engineer black soul gems as a means of understanding eternal life. He used aging temple saints, Felms, Olms, and Lothis as test subjects, transferring their souls into black soul gems and placing them in factotum bodies. Unfortunately, all test subjects, though their souls survived the process, they inevitably went completely insane, which led the study of black soul gems to become banned by the Clockwork Apostles. At some point towards the end of the First Era, Sotha Sil spent some time on Artaeum, even teaching many of the new Psijic mages of that time period. While there, he did more studying of Dwemer creations and made improvements on his clockwork creations. He left some behind on Artaeum. After her ascension, Almalexia wielded her divine power for the protection and benefit of the Dwemer for thousands of years. Where Sotha Sil preferred to remain aloof, sticking to his clockwork ambitions, Vivek and Almalexia preferred to pursue the betterment of their people, taking very active roles in leading their people. Her acts of amazing kindness are countless. It is said the blessing of Almalexia held extraordinary powers, such as protecting a person from the effects of Corpus. Saint Felms was said to have been inspired by Almalexia's voice that he heard in his head. The hands of Almalexia, her personal guard, are believed to have been among the greatest warriors in all of Tamriel. Like Vivek, she wrote extensively, though she mostly stuck to children's fables and other works meant to nurture the morality of her people, rather than the cerebral spiritual guidance of Vivek's writings. In the early Second Era, Almalexia fought alongside Wulfharth, repelling the Second Akaviri invasion led by Adasum Dir Kamal. The actual target of the invasion is unclear. Some suggest the Kamal were invading northeast Skyrim, while others propose it was actually Morrowind they were targeting. Wulfharth's involvement, specifically his alliance with the Tribunal, is equally unclear, considering, prior to this event, he was one of the Tribunal's greatest enemies. Joran the Skald King refutes this, that Wulfharth fought uneasily alongside the Tribunal, that he had been summoned by the Greybeards. However, it also contradicts the defeat of the Kamal, that it was the combined might of Skyrim and the Tribunal that repelled the Akaviri, defeating them at last in Stonefalls, while the Tribunal claims it was Vivek himself who rose the sea to swallow the Kamal, saving the tired, still fighting Nordic, Dwemer, and Argonian forces Joran the Skald King doesn't even acknowledge. And yet, mysterious Akavir claims Dir Kamal himself was actually defeated at Red Mountain. Following the Second Akaviri invasion, Almalexia was a strong supporter of the Ebonheart Pact. It was she who convinced all the great houses, well, with the exception of House Telvanni, to join the pact. During the Alliance War of 2E582, Deshan was threatened by the Maul-born cult, who sought to topple the Tribunal and reinstate the worship of Daedra. They were led by Magistrix Urili Vox, who was once a handmaiden of Almalexia, who turned against the Lady of Mercy following her own son's execution, but she ultimately failed to bring down Almalexia, much less the rest of the Tribunal. The Tribunal would know a short term of peace before 2E882, until I returned to Red Mountain. I had formed a unique connection to the heart of Lorkhan and become the False Dreamer. Later in the same year, Almalexia, Sotha Sil, and Vivek made their annual return to Red Mountain, a process they disguised as a pilgrimage, but was actually their way to get to the heart of Lorkhan, to restore their divine powers with Kagranak's tools. I was careful not be discovered by the Tribunal, and, upon the Almcivi's arrival, I ambushed them. I, and my heart-white ash vampires, repelled the Tribunal, and eventually expelled them from Red Mountain. My return and subsequent weakening of the Almcivi, due to being unable to restore their power, came a crucial moment in Morrowind's history. Tiber Septim had only just risen, and his rapidly expanding empire was already decades in the making. and despite the daunting task of taking on the Tribunal, he desperately needed the ebony, and his dream of a fully united Tamriel had him finally set his sights on Morrowind. Initial skirmishes were only between the Empire and the forces of a few of the great houses, but mutual reservations grew between the Almsivi and Septim, both of whom were reluctant to face each other. Many of the Dwemer felt betrayed by their gods for reaching peace with their enemies and allowing outlanders to enter, and I took advantage of the dissent and persuaded many to my cause. Eventually, Almalexia and Sothasil withdrew, leaving Vivek to stand alone against me. Vivek's only thing supporting the ghost fence, which was a huge barrier of pure magicka erected around Red Mountain to keep me at bay, an effort which taxed his already draining power to the point he could no longer even leave his own palace. With Vivek struggling to maintain the barrier and the others out of the conflict, I was free to finish the construction of Akulakan. My end goal in all of this, Mr. Tucker, is expose the false worship of the Tribunal and destroy the ecclesiastical authority and political power of the temple, and extirpate all remaining individuals of inferior and mongrel races from Morrowind.
I understand your frustration on why you wish to see the eradication of the Tribunal, but spreading this blight across the land doesn't help your cause.
I understand your concerns, Mr. Tucker, but this is all planned to stop the Nerevarine prophecy to come true. After the corruption of the Tribunal by the Heart of Lorcan and the death of the great Chimer champion Indoril Nerevar, the Daedric Prince Azura swore that she would use her powers over dawn and dusk to resurrect Nerevar and make things right once more. The Tribunal dismissed this proclamation, saying that they were now more powerful and influential than the Daedric princes, and that their time as gods to the people of Morrowind had come to a close, even as Azura cursed the Chimer and changed them into the Dwemer. The realization of this proclamation was known as the Nerevarine prophecy, and it came to pass at the end of the Third Era as the Vardenfell crisis. Prior to its fulfillment, the Nerevarine prophecy was denounced as heresy by the Tribunal, and those groups that believed in them, Ashlanders, dissident priests, and some others, were heavily persecuted. Occasionally, a potential candidate would appear, and until recently, each one had met an untimely end through a variety of means and circumstances. According to the prophecy, a prisoner born on a certain day to uncertain parents would be sent under guard to Morrowind, would overcome numerous trials, and eventually unite the province and cast down the Tribunal as false gods. The gender and race of Nerevarine was and remains unknown, though it is well known that they would not be a native of Morrowind. This was the most widely known part of the prophecy. The remaining parts are detailed in the work 7 Visions of 7 Trials of the Incarnate.
Speaking of how things will end, what do you think the end goal is, Mr. Dagoth? Do you feel as the divine plan that was put in place will end of the Tribunal and the end of you?
This, of course, is a prophecy. I do not know. But anything can happen, Mr. Tucker. If the gods are able to change a race of people's skin to a completely different color, then I am not compelled to think their divine plan will be carried out. But, as mentioned earlier, Nerevarine prophecy is a taboo among the Tribunal. So, in some way, an enemy of my enemy is my friend. The new Nerevarine would have to survive the plagued lands that I created, avoid being jailed or killed by the ordinators that guard Vivek, and to make it to the depths of Red Mountain with the tools that my best men guard. I feel this will be a lot to accomplish by one mere. If the Tribunal gods cannot reach me, then how can a mere godless being able to beat me? The gods themselves must fall from the heavens in order to deal with us all. Against all odds, I would feel pity for such a person, to be born into a world where one false word, to be uttered from your lips, would spell your death. To overcome such a feat, the gods would have to send their very best. But in the meantime, I will carry out my plan to destroy the temple and to remove all foreign powers from these lands.
So, no matter what happens, you will continue your campaign against the Tribunal to push out the Imperials and to continue to recruit more people into your ranks. And regarding the Nerevarine prophecy, you feel, to put it bluntly, it is what it is? Would that be an accurate assessment?
That's somewhat accurate, Mr. Tucker. But my plans and ambitions are forever changing. Who knows what my next step will be? But forget about me, I want to ask, have you had an interview with Vivek, or any of the other Tribunal members?
I am currently trying to get an interview with the war poet, but as you know, he likes to keep to himself. I also wanted to ask Mr. Dagoth, would you ever consider peace talks with the Tribunal?
The problems with having discussions of peace would go against everything they've spent centuries building. Their image of being the perfect gods for the lands would be tarnished and would weaken their divine status among the common folk. As mentioned earlier, people are losing their faiths in them due to allowing foreigners to roam these precious lands. To have these talks would also mean that the Tribunal would have to expose themselves as the false gods that they are. But in the meantime, I will wait for the return of the Nerevarine. Is that all you wanted to ask?
Yes, that's everything. Thank you, Mr. Dagoth.